A town at the centre of one of Britain's most notorious child sex scandals has been named the country's first children's capital of culture. Rotherham in South Yorkshire has been selected to be the inaugural children's capital of culture in 2025, described by local authority as 365 extraordinary days of imagination, creativity and community, packed with music, dance, films and food. But with reports estimating that 1,400 children were sexually abused in Rotherham between 1997 and 2013, some are critical of the town being awarded the Children's Capital of Culture in 2025. I'm joined by columnist Samantha Smith and social policy analyst Dr. Rakib Ehsan. Thank you both for joining me. I think I'll start with you, Samantha, if you don't mind. If you could let us know, how do you think this makes other victims like yourself feel when Rotherham is becoming the UK's first ever children's capital of culture?
Frankly, I think it's an insult to those who have suffered for decades as a result of the silence, ignorance and incompetence of the local council, police, social services, schools. Those victims in Rotherham, an estimated 1,400 across 2 decades, were frankly ignored by a local council that couldn't care less about young white working class girls being raped by predominantly Pakistani men. So for them to now be claiming that Rotherham is a capital for children's culture and is this welcoming beacon of progressivism is laughable.
And Dr. Rakib, how does a town like Rotherham get shortlisted for these sorts of programmes of funding in the first place?
Well, I think that firstly, there'll be many people who would have listened to the news that Rotherham being in this position is quite remarkable considering its history. When you look here on the surface, the programme in itself is not a bad one. It's going to be a 10-day event. It's about heightening children and young people's civic participation. There's this talk about it creating life-changing cultural, social and economic opportunities. The issue here, Calvin, really is the fact that it's Rotherham Borough Council which is in the position of leading this project, which is going to involve children, young people, local businesses, cultural institutions, civic institutions. I think it's ultimately it's the fact that Rotherham is at the heart of Britain's grooming gangs crisis. It's at the heart of that decades-long story of group-based child sexual exploitation. And it's the fact that the local authority, the borough council at the heart of that scandal is now in the position of leading on this project, which is ultimately about children's and young people's civic participation.
Absolutely. So I do need to specify it's British Pakistani Muslim men. But the fact that I have to specify that is part of the problem itself. Do you think that this is a case of people being afraid of addressing this issue due to being labelled a racist? And is it a case of the Labour Party pandering to what they perceive to be a block vote? And I'll start with you on that one, Rakib, if you don't mind.
Well, I mean, I think that many of our public institutions, they're paralysed by this culture of political correctness and multicultural ideology. That diversity is inherently seen as a positive without understanding the complications that come with that. When it comes to group-based child sexual exploitation, this isn't just Rotherham. Samantha's obviously talked a great deal about Telford, but there's many localities across Britain where this is a very serious problem, where you have public institutions who, it's not just about political correctness, there's a victim-blaming culture which has taken hold in those institutions, where ultimately predominantly white working class girls, they've almost been seen as being deserving of this kind of, this child sexual abuse that they've experienced. And there's local councils and police forces which have simply not taken this issue seriously at all.
I want to address that matter, actually. If I can come to you, Samantha. After your horrible abuse, you spoke to child services, you spoke to social services and the police. How did they interact with you? Was that a positive experience for you? Or was that helpful for you in any way?
Well, I've spoke about it on GBNews a fair bit, but I would say that the local council couldn't have cared less about kids like me. The only culture in towns like Rotherham, Telford, Oldham is one of ignorance, victim blaming, and a complete lack of understanding or empathy for children that have been through so much in their lives. And let's be clear here. This isn't about perpetrating discrimination against British Pakistani Muslims. This is about thousands upon thousands of little girls, children, not child prostitutes, not madams, not young women, children being systematically groomed, raped, abused, exploited, and even murdered by adult men. And councils, local authorities, and those in positions of power turning a blind eye for decades. I think that Rotherham Borough Council have some cheek claiming to now be representing children and to be furthering their opportunities for success and prosperity when they actively ignored and shut the doors on thousands of vulnerable girls. The only culture that Rotherham should be known for is the culture of grooming in their town, and those in the positions of power shouldn't be awarded accolades. They should be held to account. They should be thrown in jail, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, so I don't think we can confirm any of them were murdered, but this money, people will say it's supposed to be an incentive and not a reward. If that's the case, where could this money be spent that would help improve the situation, Dr. Rakib?
Well, I think that, to my understanding, there's going to be funding in the region of £1.4 million from the UK government for this particular programme. There's going to be external funding from Arts Council England, I think South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, and I think even the European Regional Development Fund. In my view, though, I do think that when it comes to Rotherham, there has to be an emphasis on child safeguarding and protection. I think that if there were problems in those processes, there needs to be greater investment in that to begin with. And then you can have that discussion about creating more life-changing cultural, social and cultural opportunities. I think that the bread and butter of maximising child protection, especially for young people most at risk of group-based child sexual exploitation, should be Rotherham Borough Council's priority. And then when it comes to the money that's being received for this programme, once that's done, and that's been significantly improved, then you can talk about investing in young people's opportunities. Because at the moment, this particular part of the country has failed young people spectacularly when it comes to protecting them, especially the most vulnerable.
Rotherham Council have confirmed that's where they intend for the money to go. But do these services need a good overhaul before we can dump more money into them? If the police, the councils, the local and national governments were all complicit in the cover-up of these crimes, as per the report by Baroness J, do these services not need a complete and utter overhaul before spending more money on them? What's your stance on this, Samantha?
But I would say, as in the Telford report that was released earlier this month, the conclusions were very similar to that of Rotherham, Greater Manchester, of all of these other areas that have had child sexual exploitation scandals. It was stated in no uncertain terms that police, local councils and social services failed to act due to, quote unquote, nervousness about race, and that they had failed in their most basic job of investigating purported incidents of child sexual abuse and rape, and that they had in some cases actively encouraged those in positions of care to not report potential sexual abuse against children because they didn't want to be labelled racist. In order for Rotherham Borough Council to be able to stand as a beacon of children's culture and child safeguarding, they need to first take a long, hard look in the mirror and acknowledge responsibility for their failings over decades, because this isn't a drop in the pond. This is an entire ocean of failings that they oversaw for years upon years upon years. And now, I mean, we recently saw a video from Oldham Council of the leader of the council, Labour leader of the council, saying that the children who had been victims of child sexual exploitation hadn't had their lives ruined. That you can't say that, trying to downplay the abuse that they suffered. So long as councils continue to try and brush it under the rug, sweep it under the carpet, and minimise the part that they played in the cover-up of child sexual exploitation in their areas, they can't claim to represent or...
On that point, a spokesman